Good evening. All right, well, thank you all for coming out on such a gorgeous night and spending some time with you. My name is Joe Bojo. I'm the director of the Applied Innovation Exchange here. And welcome to What's Now San Francisco. I see a lot of familiar faces, so thank you for coming back. And just out of curiosity, how many first-timers do we have to What's Now tonight? All right. And second question, how many of you have heard of a company called Capgemini? All right, about 50-50. All right, well, let me change the ratio and who knows about Capgemini and give you a little bit of a flavor who we are and what this facility is all about. And I'll introduce the idea of what What's Now is and hand it over to Pete. So Capgemini is a global consultancy based out of Paris, out of France. We're about a $15 billion company, about 200,000 employees, and we've been growing pretty aggressively and pushing pretty aggressively into the digital and innovation space over the last couple of years, making acquisitions of design firms and strategy firms, and another investment that we've made is this facility. So this facility is called the Applied Innovation Exchange. We have 11 of them around the world. This is our flagship, and what we do here is we bring our largest clients, our largest partners, our top talent, and we engage with our clients on their biggest challenges and help them to apply innovation and get outcomes and realize the benefit of that, which we'd love to talk to you more about through the course of the evening. So that's a little bit about us. And about 3 years ago, we were setting course and breaking ground in this facility, which this building actually used to be a data center where you're sitting right now, and up front was a yoga studio. So it's changed quite a bit since we got a hold of it. But as we were setting out to come into this area, we really wanted to have an authentic, meaningful presence in this region and to give more than we get. And along the way, we were lucky enough to meet Pete Layden and reInvent, and we conceived of this concept, what is now What's Now San Francisco, and we've since expanded it, and there's a What's Now New York, so we're really proud of the concept as a way to connect with new constituencies and engage you all. So with that, let me hand it over to our partner at reInvent to take you through the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Joe. Thanks, Joe. Thanks. We love Joe. We love this space. We love Capgemini. They've been great partners. And we've really had we're now in year 3 here, folks. I don't know, for those who have been around from the beginning, it's been 3 years here now, and we're in New York as well. So those of you who have kind of like-minded folks on the other coast, flag us so we can kind of create the network and expand out that way. Take over. I'm Pete Layden. For those of you who don't know, I'm the founder of reInvent, the media company here that's helping produce this whole thing and videoing it and getting out live stream as we speak. For those that actually want to know about that, just use a hashtag if you're using social media here, because folks can watch it off the reInvent site right this time. We'll also have an edited version later. One of our taglines is called A Better Way Forward, and it's because for what we like to do through our company is to find innovators who are really thinking about better ways forward, which means kind of more positive ways forward. And this series, which we've been working on with Capgemini, is to take each month to go to a different field that's got all kinds of innovation going, find a remarkable innovator, bring them out and have them explain what's going on in that space, but also to be talking about better ways forward. And so tonight is going to be no exception. In fact, the whole talk is about the positive way forward for the future of work. Now, the other side about this series that's been so useful is over the course of the series, we cross-connect all these networks from different fields. And so the conversation isn't just with the person up here, it's actually with the person in the crowd, the people who are gathered here. So, for example, last month we did a space one, for those of you who are there. And we actually asked, okay, how many people in this room are rocket scientists? And about a third of the hands went up. we said, well, how many are astronauts? And 2 hands went up. So that was not too bad for like a kind of a 125 folks here. But the idea is it's a dialogue. And so we're going to have the second half of this conversation to be with you folks, which is a big part of what's going on here. Now, as we've gone systematically through these different fields, there's been a field that we haven't touched on was the sharing economy, or in fact, even the kind of gig economy. And it's kind of curious because actually we've been doing a lot of work in that space through reInvent. We have a whole Future of Sharing project, which we do with Airbnb for the last 2 years. And then we've done a big one with Intuit on the future of work last year. And through it all, though, I've been kind of keeping an eye on a guy called Marco Zappacosta. He is a guy who's been really wrapping his head on this. And I've been thinking, if there's one person I'd like to have moved into this space here for what's now to kind of distill and talk about this space, it'd be Marco. Now, Marco is the co-founder and CEO of Thumbtack. And what Thumbtack does is essentially it's a platform that connects people, professionals, some people are very white-collar professions as well as kind of blue-collar professions, plumbers and that, photographers and media people, to people that need this work done. And it's a crazy platform that is booming, and it's actually really spreading all over the place. There's a ton of it going on here in the Bay Area. Now, so some people would say, okay, they would categorize them as the gig economy. But Marco actually puts himself in the sharing economy and says, in fact, what we are dealing with, instead of underutilized homes or underutilized rooms or underutilized cars like other sharing economy companies, we're dealing with underutilized talents. And so we've got now Marco to talk about the sharing economy and the future of work. Now, the other thing about Marco, which is amazing, is he is a totally positive vision guy. And he has basically been saying the biggest problem in the future of work right now is that we've got all these dystopian visions. We've got all the specters of AI and displacement from jobs and all the kind of carnage ahead of us here. And what we really need is a positive vision of how this could actually all work. How could it all come together? How could these platforms tie together independent workers in new ways? How could companies benefit from that? Workers benefit from that, and the whole economy benefit as a whole. And so he's been spending a lot of time thinking about that. His team at Thumbtack has been getting a lot of data together that puts this in a bigger picture, thinking about trying to get people to think long-term about this. And so what we're going to have today is he's going to come here and give you a presentation to start off, to kind of stretch your minds and kind of put what's happening today in this gig sharing economy in a broader context of what's happened over the last decades, and kind of get you thinking big picture. And then he's going to throw out some ideas of his own kind of positive way forward. And then we're going to roll into a conversation with all of you, because there's a lot of incredible folks in this room who know a heck of a lot about ways we can find positive ways forward. So with that, let's bring Marco up. Thanks, Marco.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks to the Capgemini folks for having us. So this is an issue that I'm very passionate about. I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's only going to become more important. And as Pete alluded to, one of my frustrations with this debate is we keep talking about the future of work as what it's not. You know, it's going to be automated by robots or automation or software. And so we kept talking about internally, so what is it? What is the future of work? And so my hope today is give you our answer. We think it's a very credible answer, but most of all, we want to start a dialogue about creating that sort of specific vision about what the future of work can be, because only with that can then we align on what are the challenges with that? How do we make sure that we mitigate those challenges and support the best parts of it and rally around it to make it a great future of work for everybody? So Pete gave you a little bit of background, but Thumbtack is the easiest way to hire local professionals. Everybody in here has something on their to-do list right now that we can help with. So we cover 1,000 different categories. You can download the app, and within minutes, we can connect you with pros who are qualified, interested, and available to do the jobs that you need done. So check it out. We cover home improvement, events, wellness, lessons, business services. If it's on your to-do list, we can almost certainly help with it. In fact, we have active pros in all but one county in the United States. So wherever you live, we can help you. And just for context, here in the Bay Area, in the last year, 360,000 customers have used us to find pros, and we have more than 25,000 active pros here in the Bay Area. So for 70% of these folks, this is how they make their living. This is their full-time employment. And because we have so many of these pros, hundreds of thousands on the platform, we have learned a lot from them. And through that, we're hoping to tell their story about what the future of work could be. So before getting into that, though, let's talk about the good news in today's economy. There is some good news. First off, we have economic growth. This sort of shaded graph in the middle, that fall, that's the Great Recession. That's the second biggest economic contraction this country has ever had. And now, 10 odd years later, we're well past that. That's a huge and positive thing. The other thing is, we are in the midst of the single longest continuous period of job growth this country has ever seen. That is great news. Even better is that the employment to population ratio, something that you guys have probably heard a lot about, is actually back to its pre-recession levels. It's not as high as it was in the sort of late 90s and early 2000s, but when you adjust for demographics, people are coming back into the workforce. So this is sort of spreading opportunity. And you see it also in hourly wages. So for a long time, you can see it from the 80s to the 2000s, there was very, very little growth in median wages in this country. Over the last sort of 8, 9, 10 years, we've seen real growth. And that's something we should be particularly excited about because there was a lot of talk about an economy that no longer had wage growth for the median employee. In fact, this is for non-supervisory employees, sort of wage earners. So this is good news. But I have some bad news for you too. First off, the United States at this point is now more unequal than it has been since the Roaring 20s. Think about that. In the history of our country, we have almost reached the peak of inequality right now. You can see that in this chart, this set of charts. So on the left, you have the sort of 35 years between the post-war and 1980. And what you see is that across these income quintiles, growth was spread pretty evenly. Even the bottom 20% over that 35-year period saw their wages grow a ton, over 100%. That's broad-based economic growth. But over the last 35 years, you see a very different story. The bottom 25% have seen their wages go down, and the vast majority of wage increase has gone to the top 1%. This is what's driving the increase in inequality. This is not good. Secondly, we have a problem in that we have less new business formation than we would expect. So if you look back over the last just about 50 years and look at the trend line of new business formation, since the Great Recession, we are operating way under. There's about 180,000 fewer businesses in this country than there should be. Those are jobs that aren't created. Those are businesses and communities that aren't happening. And economists actually don't know why. But this is really bad for a reason I'll talk about later, which is that new businesses create effectively all new jobs in this country. Net new job creation is driven by new business formation. So this one is not good news. So this is another important stat. For a long, long time in the United States, a significant percent of households moved across state lines every year. They did it for a lot of reasons, but fundamentally it was about economic gravity and moving towards opportunity. Over the last 15 and 20 years, we've seen a huge drop in the number of households that are moving to opportunity. This is calcifying areas and making it harder and harder for people to participate in the engines of job creation, which are not equally distributed. This is the single saddest chart I will show you today. So I don't know if you guys follow the work of Raj Chetty. He's an economist at Stanford, and he's been given access to super detailed IRS records. And one of the things that he has done is looked at what happens to the children relative to their parents' earning potential over time. My view is that the American dream is that you work hard and you can provide a better life for your kids. That's what it comes down to. And the fact is, that is no longer true. So if you go back to the post-war period, about 90% of children, all children, could expect by the age of 35 to be out-earning their parents. That to me is the American dream working the way it should be. Parents work hard, provide for their kids, kids do even better. Now, it's a coin flip. We're at 50-50 in the latest cohorts of this. That is scary, that parents, despite all of their hard work, all of their effort, are not necessarily leaving their children in a better circumstance than they grew up in. This one bums me out. On top of all this, we're seeing a huge change in the nature of work. So this slide is about the share of workers that are in, quote, independent arrangements. Independent arrangements are different types of things. They're temporary help, they're contract workers, on-call workers, and independent contractors. Independent contractors is the purple, it's the biggest one. But if you sum all these up, now 16% of all workers in this country are working in these sort of alternative arrangements or independent arrangements. This trend line is expected to continue. In fact, when you look at sort of different cuts, the Freelancers Union has a big survey, the McKinsey Global Institute has done a big survey, and when they look at both primary earners, people who do it full-time for their wage, as well as supplementary earners who do it sort of part-time for an additional cash, you're getting up to 30% of all workers participate in some way in this sort of independent worker arrangement. So that's outside of the traditional W-2 sort of salary that many of us probably have in this room. If you look at primary workers, again, you get to this like 10 to 15% and growing. Interestingly, we included this bottom one, online platforms only. That's things like Uber and Lyft and Postmates. Today, only a tiny fraction of people are doing that as the only way to earn a living. So despite here in Silicon Valley and in the future of work, we talk about these on-demand platforms as being the sort of catalyst for it all, it is a much broader phenomenon. Automation, the bugaboo, it is real. So depending on what estimates you take, somewhere between 9 and almost 50% of all employees in this country are at work of having their jobs automated. Now, I want to be very careful not to paint this just as a bad thing. It is obviously an immense challenge for society to find new jobs for up to 50% of its populace. That said, automating the work that a human would otherwise have to do is how all development has happened. We don't look back and begrudge the washing machine or the telephone circuit switch as putting people out of work. We think of it as an innovation that saved labor and made us richer and more prosperous. That's the same thing that's happening here. The challenge is the speed and breadth that it's happening. So on one hand, and as consumers, it'll be great, but as workers, it's an enormous risk. So before we give you our answer to what we think the future of work is, which I know you're very excited to hear, there are a few things that we're sure it is not. And this is just to sort of remove these from the debate. It is not going to be working in manufacturing plants. So actually, manufacturing output, this green line, is booming. And the US at this point is producing more than twice as much manufacturing output than it was just 25 and 30 years ago, but it's doing it with vastly fewer workers. There's more robots, fewer humans, cheaper goods. It's a good story unless you happen to work in a town that only has one plant. Then it is a very bad and hard story. But no one is arguing that these jobs are coming back in enough numbers to change the nature of the future of work. Secondly, unions, despite their immense power to help with collective bargaining and advocating for labor, are declining as a share of the workforce. And especially when you look forward and you look at where work is projected to grow, unions are even less penetrated in those industries. So despite in the past we could look to unions as a way to advocate for labor and to fight for their rights, that is unlikely to be the case in the future. Also, on-demand platforms. This is from their own stats. A very, very small fraction of on-demand workers today do it as their full-time employment. And if you were to plot these numbers over time, what you would see is that the number is actually going down. So, an immense customer innovation, a great way for supplemental income, but not a source of long-term, full-time employment. Particularly when you think of the fact that all these companies are looking to automate their workers out of their services, then you can be really sure that it is not the future of work. So, what is the future of work? We worked very, very hard to come up with a pithy and memorable line to sum it all up, and this is what we came up with. Non-tradable, non-routine jobs. So what does that mean, non-tradable? That's something that has to be done in person. If I am coming over to your house to help fix the radiator, that job is not getting sent to Mexico or China. Non-routine. What does that mean? A routine job is something where you as a worker are doing the same thing again and again and again. Now, this isn't about the skill of that job. There are certainly low-skill jobs or blue-collar jobs, things like assembly line workers, that are very routine, and those are absolutely at risk of being automated. But there are also jobs like radiologists, which are also very routine and also at risk of automation. So this is what is left. You're talking about plumbers and social workers and nurses and teachers and engineers. This is very much the future of work. It is local services. Now, you could say, we're talking up our book, and certainly it's true that we represent a lot of these categories, but it is much bigger than just us. All of healthcare, all of education, a lot of the sort of exporting knowledge work that happens here in the Bay Area, Apple, that's part of this. These are the companies these are the type of jobs that are sticking around. And this actually drives that point home. It's not just us like making this up and telling you what we think it's going to be because it sounds good. If you actually look at the trends, you can see it. So what this highlights, on the top you've got non-routine jobs. They're actually growing quite nicely. Over the last 15, 20 years, we've seen strong growth in non-routine work. And it's not just the manual white-collar stuff that's growing, or excuse me, not just the cognitive stuff that's growing, it's the manual stuff too. On the flip side, both routine cognitive and routine manual jobs are shrinking. So when you think about automation, remember that automation applies primarily to routine things. So that leaves non-routine things. On the flip side, again, not making this up, the non-tradable jobs, they're growing. The tradable jobs are being traded away. Economic gravity is such that if something can be done as well but cheaper in a foreign country, it will happen. It will get shipped overseas. And arguably, that could be a very good thing for the workers there, for the consumers here. It's a global world. But what's left is the non-tradable half. And if actually you ask the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they will tell you that 91% of jobs in the coming decade are expected to be local service jobs. So this is what we have. This is what's coming. And an important thing to remember is that entrepreneurs are going to create these jobs. So what this shows is the millions of jobs created by the age of the firm. And so when you look at firms that are over a year old, on net, all those firms collectively in this entire country are shrinking, are losing workers. All net new job creation is happening by firms that are 0 to 1 year old. Entrepreneurship is key to this story. And it's not Silicon Valley entrepreneurship of raising venture capital and starting a tech company. It's opening a corner store. It's starting a tutoring company. It's being somebody who goes into business for themselves or with a small group of people. So that is what it is. That's going to happen. The question then is, so what are the challenges? I believe the single biggest challenge with this sort of future of work that we should expect, one that has many more independent workers who are often working many more different types of jobs, is going to be income security and income volatility. So the nice thing about working for GM for 40 years and getting that paycheck every 2 weeks is that it's stable. It's never going to grow tenfold, but it's also probably not going to go to zero. This is a graph that shows for people who are self-employed, how many months do they experience a swing or spike in their income. Not surprisingly, if you're self-employed, if you're an independent worker, you have much more volatile income. This is going to be one of the biggest challenges we have to address with the future of work. Second one, not all places are created equal. So I don't know if you guys have heard of the book by Enrico Moretti, The Geography of Jobs. I think, did I get that right? Is that the title of his book? The what? The New Geography of Jobs. Thanks, Lucas. It's phenomenal, but what it talks about is that we should expect places that have universities as anchor tenants and knowledge working, exporting companies like we have here in Silicon Valley, like a Google or a Facebook, to be the hubs of growth. Now, what he also talks about is that each one of those sort of high-tech or knowledge exporting jobs actually generates 5 additional service jobs in that community. It could be a local company that serves Google or Facebook that provides some on-site service. It could be people that support the people in their own community. But this is where it's happening. It is not going to be nearly as distributed as our agricultural economy or even our industrial economy. Our service economy is going to be ever more clustered. And it makes sense because these jobs are ones that have to be done in person. And so people are going to continue to cluster. We may have aesthetic preferences for an economy that works just as well in rural areas as well as cities, but that's not what we have. We have one that's ever more going to work in cities. Next, you're going to have to keep learning in life. The days of that sort of lifetime employment are over, and what that means is you're likely going to have multiple careers in your life, not just one. And so lifelong learning is something that employers are going to require more and more of, and the employees themselves feel it too. So this question of training and reskilling, something that we are not very good at as a country, is going to become increasingly important in a more dynamic world. So those are the challenges, and they're very real, and I don't want to minimize them. But it's helpful to align on that vision of what we think the future of work so we can start to identify these challenges and then chip away at them. And so here's the path forward as we see it, our perspective on this. And this is something that is a societal conversation. It's not just like one answer, and it's not just one sector, but we have a view, being a technology company, of what technology companies are going to do as part of this. I think the way to think about technology's role in this is that, is not this way. This is a traditional way of thinking about technology. So typically, people think about, all right, you create a technology, that technology replaces labor, and therefore you get prices to go down, which is really good because as consumers we benefit, but at the cost of displacing labor. This is a zero-sum view of technology. It happens, right? This happens all the time, but it is not the only thing that happens. You also get this dynamic, where technology can expand networks, can expand access, can create markets, and through that can also increase competition, which is great. We as consumers have access to a dramatically more diverse set of goods and services because of that competition, and it actually also creates more entrepreneurship. One of the things that I hope you take away from is that the typical frame of technology in these conversations around the future of work is technology as a substitute for labor. And that's true. It does that. But technology is also a complement to labor and can enable it in new ways and can enable it to be better in ways that without technology would never be possible. And what does that mean? To me, that means we are replacing the firm, the company, with software. In a world where we atomize the world of work, we're not clustered in these giant corporations, but we're independent actors who are coming and going from various arrangements, different careers, different jobs. How friction-free that process is critical to how many people can participate in it. And I think what you're seeing happening across a wide range of companies is that we're replacing the firm with software. I think that's what Thumbtack does today. We help with customer acquisition. You know, if you talk to a small business, you'll hear their number one complaint is finding new customers. And unfortunately, the modern world of online marketing is very, very complicated. And being a great plumber or caterer or tutor is a completely orthogonal skill to being a great online marketer. And so Thumbtack can come in and say, hey, we'll take care of that for you. Shopify can do the same for e-commerce companies. Etsy can do it for craft sellers. And through that, we can empower these people who may be not very good online marketers to do what they do best and create this service or create this good and offer it to their customers. And it's not just with acquisition. Bookkeeping, financial services are becoming much more efficient and able to serve individuals rather than whole firms. Also, things like access to benefits. Technology can radically help with that. You don't need a benefits department. You can just use your Stride Health app, and with that, get the access to the benefits that you and your employees need. Ditto with information sharing. Ever more, there are ways to do that. Now, I'm not saying that firms are going to disappear, but if you go back to Ronald Coase's theory of the firm, I think what you're seeing is software is changing that. The theory of the firm is all about the fact that transaction costs between individuals get so high that it's easier to band together to do it under one roof rather than transacting as individual actors in the marketplace. But software can lubricate that, can facilitate that, and that's really important for this modern economy that we are now building. And it can be immensely empowering to labor, to workers, and to the future of work. But technology companies alone are not going to be able to drive all of this change. Government has a huge role to play. And Thumbtack has been surveying our pros a lot and thinking about this, and we've sort of come up with 4 areas of focus. We will admit we're not policymakers, so it's not like we have the answers, but we see these trends and we talk to our pros, and this is what we think would help them the most. So first off, we have to make benefits portable. If you look at how the welfare state in the United States, or the sort of social contract is administered, it's through W-2 employment. And this makes sense because it was created in the 20s and 30s when the vast majority of people were working as W-2 employees, and so it was easier to administer through a company. Social Security started by going through companies. But that's no longer the base case assumption, and therefore we have to restructure how benefits are administered and delivered. And this is independent of how much you want to provide to workers. The point here is just that we need to provide it to individuals and not employees. Second one, streamline, but don't eliminate the regulatory environment. The more we act as individuals and small businesses in this economy, the higher the burden of any level of regulation is. GE has a compliance department. They don't care what the law says. They have plenty of lawyers on staff to figure out and deal with it. But when you talk to a plumber who's thinking about starting a small business and hiring a few other people, they're rightfully very worried that they're not going to follow the laws in the right way. They're not going to get the right licenses and pay the right things in the right ways. And it's not because they don't want to, it's just really, really complicated. So as the average size of the individual actor goes down, we have to think about delivering a regulatory state that is easy to comprehend and comply with. Third, training. This is the one that honestly I feel like I have seen the fewest good answers for. But training becomes really important if we want to make sure that people are able to keep up with this ever more dynamic world of work. And the last one is addressing the housing crisis in urban America. Yeah, absolutely. So if the future of work is these non-tradable, non-routine services that we're offering to each other in our own communities, we have to be able to live or at least travel to where all the people are and do it in a way that is cost effective. So this, I think, is the most solvable one because it's literally just laws that we created that make housing expensive. It's not a technological problem. So this is our view on what government can do to help this future of work. But I look forward to hearing from a lot of you and others about what are all the other things, because I'm sure this list is not exhaustive. So finally, why should you be happy with this vision? A couple things. One, there is job growth. It's happening in non-routine, non-tradable job. There is wage growth in these jobs as well. Also, when you talk to these people, and I have the privilege of doing that a fair bit, you hear an immense amount of pride and purpose that comes from being an independent worker. The surveys that we have, the big McKinsey survey that went out, found that almost 70% of independent workers do it because they want to, not because it's their only option. And when you do something that you have created and sort of serve your customers directly, there's an immense pride that comes from that. And I talk to these people all the time. This is a pro, Mark, who talked about working in an insurance company, and he felt like his insurance company was not a good actor, and he just felt bad about it. He was a photographer on the side, and one day he basically decided to take the plunge and sort of go for it and become a full-time photographer, to leverage this talent that he had to turn it into a career. And he had the hustle, he had the ability, and we just helped him connect with customers to provide that online marketing. And the two together were able to create a very great outcome for him, and I believe the same can happen for millions and millions of Americans all around the country. So the future of work can be bright, but we have to first rally around what it's going to be and then work very hard to make it as inclusive and as effective as possible. So thank you very much.
Wow. What a job. Come on, we're going to come out here. It's like, have you ever seen it's such a beautiful pulling together of data, and just a way to really concretize here. Let's just bring it back here a little bit more. A lot of these things that people have been hearing out there in various ways through the work. Here, I'm just going to basically, hang on one second here. Oops. Oh, no. Sorry. There we go. So here's what we're going to do, folks. I'm going to just talk a few things, pull them out of here, about the future, about this positive vision, and then we're going to really draw it into you folks out there. But one of the things I'd just like to do, there's a few things I'd just like to tee up that you didn't say. You did an amazing kind of overview of the situation, the context, the big picture, where it's been, where it's going even. But let's talk a little bit more about tech. Do you think, given that AI, the AI has been kind of brought up as a displacement, but do you see the kind of infrastructure of connecting all these independent workers as being kind of enhanced through kind of applications of near-term AI here? So for example, a lot of the things is like you said, finding work. Like couldn't AI be kind of used to connect up people for business opportunities? Or couldn't AI be used to kind of do all the administrative tasks for these workers? I'm just wondering, to what extent do you see other things besides platforms as kind of potential problem solvers of this challenge that we have to deal with this atomized kind of economy?
Yeah, so it's a great point. First off, I think it's helpful to clarify what the true innovation is with AI. So in the broad arc of software development, we've mainly been programming with explicit heuristics. If this, then that, in a very complicated way. You can add a lot of those together to get really complicated machines, but that's the core of it. The difference with AI is that instead of telling a computer what to do, you can tell it to learn. It can learn a skill by observation and trial and error. And with that, it can learn skills that we ourselves don't know how to program. That is magical. That is incredible. And with that, I have no doubt that there will be many applications that are applied to individual workers, individual small business owners. We do that on our platform, and most of the other companies that I cited are doing the same thing. So in as much as it will replace labor and be that substitute for it, it will also be a complement for it.
And are you talking to companies out there? You're a CEO of a company here. Do you see kind of new technologies being applied in this space to kind of empower kind of these independent workers in new ways that are outside the platforms?
So, we use it for matching purposes. So thinking
Okay, so there you
about if you as a customer come in, which of our pros are you most likely to want to talk to? we could ask you, do you want a small business or a large business? But the truth is, customers actually don't even know how to define their preferences at times. But mining all the data that we have, we can leverage these machine learning algorithms to build up a better set of matches that we could have, honestly, we would have been able to do ourselves by thinking about if this, then that. So anytime there's like a fuzzy process around sort of matching, predicting, pricing, AI is and machine learning is a perfect tool to make that better.
Okay, video, virtual reality, we're getting now increasingly kind of people using these long distance video connections. You didn't really touch on that at all, and that would kind of seem to be potentially at least an argument that we could do more dispersed work, particularly knowledge work, and that essentially doesn't have to always cluster. I'm just curious how you think of that as playing into the scenario or not.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would argue that what we've seen over the last few decades is that as our virtual conferencing and our virtual telepresence technologies get better and better, the truly valuable thing is meeting in the real world, right? I can watch a YouTube video of almost anybody on earth at this point, and that is awesome, and I spend many hours doing that. But meeting you guys in the real world, like, that's the rare thing, that's the special thing, and that, I think, becomes more special and more valuable in a world where I can email anybody or video conference with anybody. And so I would actually see these technologies increasing the returns of in-person interaction and clustering us even more, would be my guess.
So the trends continue. And in fact, VR, the kind of deep immersion of virtual reality, you think is not going to necessarily shake that up in any new way?
I guess I am long on meat space, and I think it's going to be around for a long time.
Got you. Now, you gave a lot of ideas there into what the government should do. But you left out a couple things that I just want to get out there before we kind of open this discussion up. For example, there's been a lot of talk about this coming disruption and how we need something to kind of bridge that volatility through some kind of guaranteed income. Some people talk about a universal basic income. We just talked with Chris Hughes in New York, our version just a couple weeks ago, on his idea of guaranteed basic income, everyone under 50,000 getting some kind of consistent kind of cash, essentially. Yeah. Where do you fit in that? Do you see that as a kind of useful thing, or do you see that as kind of a counterproductive thing?
So, a bit of both. On one hand, I think anything that can spur this conversation around how we solve income volatility and income security is a worthwhile conversation to have, and I welcome it with the UBI folks. However, I find it a little hollow that the people who are promoting this concept are unwilling to go to bat for the more tangible programs that we already have that could be improved and modified. This is a pie-in-the-sky thing, right? Like, adding UBI might happen in the coming century. Probably not. And so if you care about workers today and tomorrow, you should spend your advocacy dollars and efforts working on the programs that we have and making those incrementally better. So, we have the earned income tax credit. That is real. That's there. Let's talk about making that more broadly applicable. So I worry that it sort of is a way to opt out from the hard work of fixing the system we have today.
Now, you talk about government, and we don't want to get too sidetracked here, but you didn't mention politics. But when you see the current state of American politics, or even regional politics, what do you think about the prospects of seeing these kind of changes? I mean, do you think the kind of tensions and problems we're having now are essentially going to create an opening for some real changes short term here, or do you see it as kind of paralyzing these needed efforts to kind of happen? I'm just curious where you fit on the...
I'm a naturally very optimistic person,
okay.
And Congress tests that for me. I want to say yes, but I don't see it. So I think what government is catalyzed by typically is crisis. And what you're actually seeing in California is the housing crisis is catalyzing action, is catalyzing advocacy, and now our gubernatorial candidates are all talking about their housing policy. My guess is none of them actually cared about housing policy, but because it's become an important debate and a crisis, they're forced to respond and to innovate on it. So I think, I wish it weren't true, but I think it will take a crisis to catalyze some of the change that is necessary. Now, I think one counterpoint to that is Obamacare, or the AMA, ACA. There was sort of a healthcare crisis in this country in the terms of how low our insured rate was, and so you could say that was what catalyzed it. But this really was the force of will of an administration that saw this as, a legacy-defining sort of change, and they drove it through. So there is hope. It can happen, but Congress does not, or the executive does not inspire confidence right now, for me.
Fair enough. We might open that up a little bit here in a minute. You're being cited in all these lists of kind of you're a millennial generation,
Yeah.
kind of front-end millennial generation. And given that kind of thing that you just showed about the coming down of the American dream kind of cratering, it's the beginning of essentially the millennial generation's years,
Yep.
which has yet to see how they'll play out.
Yep.
But do you feel in the course of other tech folks, yourself, leading companies, do you feel there's like a generational energy to really fundamentally rework this in a new way? I mean, do you think it's essentially going to be the legacy of your generation maybe to start to really blast through new ways in this space?
I think people are going to have to get a whole lot more mad first. If you just look at the voting rates, it's shocking how few people in my generation vote. And it's probably because they don't believe it's a way to enact change. They're smart, thoughtful people, like all generations. Young people don't vote much. So I don't know. I think with housing policy, again, is an example where people are pissed. They say, look, when the generation before us or two generations before us moved to the Bay Area or moved to California, the boomers, they could afford a home with about sort of 3 years of salary. And so you save, you put a down payment out, you take a mortgage, you buy your plot of land, you have a home, you live the American dream. Now it's 11 times annual earnings. And so you have people, like I grew up here, and a lot of my friends are wondering whether they can raise families here. And that, I think, pisses people off and makes them sad and makes them start to ask for change.
So we'll see if that's the impetus for that. Why is it so essential? You alluded to it, but let's just be articulate about why you think it's so important to get a positive vision forward. Do you think it's debilitating to not see it? Do you think because I actually share this idea that that's the missing piece right now.
There's no hope in this conversation, and that gets people down. And also, unfortunately, fear-mongering is like a very powerful narrative. Be scared, things are bad and getting worse. I think it's easy. It's like a cheap and easy message to put out there. But unfortunately, it doesn't tell you, so what? Like, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And I think, with this positive vision, it's more about having a North Star that we think is likely to happen such that we can work to make that as good as it possibly can be and to galvanize sort of action. I just worry that with all the doom and gloom, like, you just kind of want to throw your hands up and say, well, fuck this, like, we're fucked. And that's not very helpful.
Agreed. But the final thing on that, though, is why do you think it's so hard to rough out a positive way forward? Because why isn't it out there? Why aren't there all kinds of folks doing this? Why isn't there like a concrete way forward, not only for kind of the tech community, for a political environment, whatever it is? It feels like it's kind of, is it just difficult to envision that? It's hard to kind of conceptualize it? It's, what do you think?
We're talking about the future. So the truth is nobody actually knows. We have a point of view and we think it's sort of thoughtful and educated, but we're talking about something, the future of work, the future of capitalism, the social contract in the United States. Like, these are big, immense things that no one person is going to get right, or no one institution. And so I think there is I don't know why. I think we're in a position where we hear about it so much from our pros, and we feel like we're in the center of this conversation, and so we just saw this void and wanted to step into it. My guess is as this becomes a louder and louder conversation, which I think is inevitable, because these changes are not slowing down, they're speeding up, you'll see more and more people sort of put out their visions. But, I would say in this country, nobody, like our political leadership, our political establishment, is not rallying people around a vision of the future and a vision for the economy and capitalism and free enterprise that can be inclusive and productive for everybody. And that's a problem. I wish somebody would. Seems worthwhile.
Completely agree
Important.
with that. So final question, just thinking about it here a little bit, in the future. So you talked about the percentage of independent workers. You were implying that you see that growing immensely.
Yep.
Do you think in 5, 20, or whatever, let's say 10, 15, 20 years, do you think 75% of the economy will be kind of organized around more independent folks? Do you see, just how extensive is this atomized economy of independent workers on the one hand, kind of integrated with some kind of AI, next generation technologies that are essentially empowering them? How much of this is going to be the future, and how much is it going to be a portion of a future that will look pretty much the same?
So,
in your opinion?
in my opinion, there are going to be these sort of giant tentpole institutions, let's call them. They're not even companies, like Google. And they're effectively natural monopolies. And it's good and bad, it's just what they are, that will get bigger and continue to get bigger, and that'll be true across the landscape of the economy. But outside of those, I think what you will see is ever more people participating in more ad hoc sort of arrangements. You already see it. So Hollywood is basically already like this. Hollywood is a bunch of people who come together for a project, a movie, a TV show, band together, make it happen, and then melt away. And then they band together again over here. And sure, there are places like talent agencies that employ some people here and there, but by and large, as an industry, it's all gig work. Journalism has a lot of this already. I think software development and the sort of open source community is this in a sort of incredibly distributed way. So you already have examples outside of sort of tech or sort of new agey things that operate this way. And my guess is it's going to continue to happen. One, because the technological trends are that way. But two, I think there's also a pull. If you talk to a 22-year-old and you say, how about this? I'm going to give you lifetime employment at General Motors, and you never have to worry about income security ever again. I bet a lot of people would turn you down. And they'd be like, I do not want to work at General Motors for 50 years. I would blow my brains out. That'd be so boring. And so it's not just like the world is going that way. I think people want that diversity. They want that change. They are hungry for different experiences. So it's partly also the world we want. And therefore, I think that trend is going to continue to accelerate.
We meaning your generation, or?
Yeah. I think we had the privilege of growing up in a world that had more plenty in it. And so this sort of offer of a full-time employment is not something that we are sort of pre-wired to want, as opposed to the generation that either grew up with parents in the Depression or themselves as an echo of the Depression, where man, if you got a job for life, you jump on that and you hold on to it as hard as you can. So it's I don't think that's what people want.
I think you're really right about that. And but we've heard a lot of his ideas. You've heard of me kind of chiming in from here. Let's talk to folks in this room. I know there's folks from a lot of the companies in the sharing economy and the gig economy. I know that from the list we were studying here. I know a lot of folks here know a lot of things here. We've got 2 mics. We're live streaming this, and we'll also do the edit of it later. So when you do get the mic, stand up, identify yourself, say kind of how you fit in the world here, and give a question or a comment on that. And I'm kind of interested to hear what I would say for the rest of you is be thinking in your head, what elements was he, what's left here to kind of fill out? What are things that you'd kind of push back on if someone would say, I'm not sure that's true, and just kind of how would you kind of help fill out this positive vision of the future work? So anyhow, hands of folks that have some things that they want to say. There's a woman in the back there, and let's start off there. And we've got, just as you go, just throw your hands up at different times so I can kind of keep a little bit of a sense of what's going on here. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathy Crumpy. I'm the COO of
Could you stand up, by the way?
I have a lot of stuff in my lap.
Oh, sorry, but it still would be helpful.
Hold on. Stuff management. Can we outsource that? So I'm the COO of a consulting firm. We've been in business for 30 years. I've essentially been managing people in the gig economy for 20 years of that. So this is not a new concept to many of us. But I want to push back on the future because I'm also very optimistic about the future of work. I see so much happening in the with the B Corp movement, for example. So we're also a B Corp, and I think that the movement that you've seen with other CEOs speaking that we have a responsibility of corporations to give back, and I think that's really positive. And I've seen that in the B Corp movement. I've seen what it's done for our culture and our talent, and I'd love to hear what you think about that B Corp movement and social movement.
Yeah, so I think there's a huge opportunity for institutional innovation. And I think the B Corp movement is exactly that, which is saying, hey, we want to be an institutional structure that is not simply profit maximizing. We want to be double or triple bottom line. And we want to be known for that. We want people to hire us for that. And we want investors who support us for that. I think that's awesome. I think we should have more innovation like this. The other one that I've seen talked about lately, which I'm excited about, is the long-term stock exchange. So basically there's this idea where stock voting power comes as your tenure as a stockholder grows. This is an institutional innovation to try to fight against short-termism, where today a activist investor can buy 6% of your company and instantly demand a new board, or you sell, or you break yourself up, or whatever, when the truth is they're just trying to flip the stock in the next couple quarters. That to me seems silly or broken, and I'd much rather a world where the people who have the power to vote inside of a company are the ones who've held that asset the longest. And I'm sure there's a ton more ideas like B Corp, like the long-term stock exchange, and we need to explore that a lot more than I think we have to date, because what we have is clearly not good enough.
In the way back, we've got a guy who's been on this issue for a while here. Do you want to step up and identify yourself and make your comment?
Hey, I'm Greg Ferenstein. I'm a writer. I think you talked a lot about income volatility. I'm curious what your experience is for your pros. Are there any conditions in which being a pro, an independent contractor, self-employed, is more or as stable as traditional wage work? What are those conditions, and do they scale?
So we have not looked at this question from a stability standpoint, but we have looked at it from a total earning standpoint. So one of the things we see is that pros on Thumbtack that have a high school degree earn $10,000 a year more than the average worker with just a high school degree. So what we think is happening is that we are helping them capitalize on their talent better than they could on their own. And we think it's something that could be expanded to a lot more people. But I have not looked at the question of when this type of work is more stable. My guess is it's fundamentally less stable, sadly. And so I think we're going to have to come up with ways to smooth it out, either as a platform ourselves, where it becomes a feature of the platform that we can offer sort of income insurance or income security. You give up a fraction of your earnings to sort of buy into a pool that sort of helps you out when things don't go well. There are things like that we'd love to try out over time. But my guess is it is probably not more stable, sadly.
But it's interesting that you think the tech companies themselves could solve some of that instability, not necessarily a government benefits program.
I think it should be both.
Yeah.
I don't see why it's mutually exclusive.
Totally. We got Devin over here.
How you doing? My name's Devin. I work in the innovation technology space. And I guess my question for you is, around some of the things you mentioned, I appreciated you brought up Ronald Coase and kind of how these natural monopolies, as you mentioned, Google and others, lead to your kind of positive vision of how technology can enable a future of work that allows for a greater kind of coordination across spaces. My question is regarding worker co-ops, and particularly maybe whether you've ever considered making Thumbtack a cooperative model, because otherwise you still have these kind of rent extraction models where the platform dominates and is able to kind of manipulate or extract rent from its employees, workers, however you want to think of them.
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting question. So the core of it is network effect businesses accrue immense power to the owner of the network, despite the fact that the individual participant is the one that's sort of creating that value. I actually think cryptocurrencies offer a way to get around this, where you're actually, in participating in the market, you are an equity holder of the network itself, effectively. And so as the network appreciates in value, you capture some of that upside. That is not something we are currently developing, but I think as a thought experiment, it's very powerful. I think as public companies, there's ways to offer sort of share buying programs to the platform participants. That's something I think we're much more likely to explore, as we get ready to do that and into the future. But it's true, like it's unfair, fundamentally, and so there are ways around it, but we have to decide as a society to sort of create them. And they can be technological, like cryptocurrencies and things like that, or it can be government fiat and through taxation or regulation or antitrust. I don't know which one's right and which one's wrong, but there are a lot of ways to attack that problem.
By the way, can I see hands of people who want to, we got one here, but I just want to also understand who else. Anybody on this side over too? Okay, that's all good. Let's go here.
Hi, John Arnsmeyer, Small Business Majority. So have you tracked how many of your pros actually begin to grow and hire people? And a related question is, how do you see businesses with, say, 5, 10, 20 employees? We're still pretty small in our economy, but not exactly the way you've described pros. How do you see them fitting into all of this?
Yeah, so great question. So on Thumbtack, about 50% of our pros are solo entrepreneurs, so just them, and about 50% are small businesses with somewhere between 2 and 20 employees. So we work with a lot of these people. Think your moving company, your HVAC company, all these folks tend to be sort of bigger groups. What we see is that there are two sort of types of pros on the platform. There's what we call the strivers, who want to build the biggest business they can. And maybe it's a house cleaning company, but they want to build the biggest damn house cleaning company they've ever seen. And that's just who they are. They're empire builders, they're strivers, and growth is what they want to do. But then we also have a group of maintainers. And what they want to do is earn $3,500 a month as fast as they can, and then play golf with their buddies as much as they can. We're open to both. And we think that both is totally valid. If you love playing golf with your buddies, like, awesome. Let's help make you do that as much as you can. So we help companies grow, and so we see it happening a lot, and we hear these stories all the time. The house cleaning example actually comes from this house cleaning company here in the Bay Area, No Spot. And it was one dude who was at Molly Maids. And one time, this Joaquin, this founder, was basically like, wait. Molly Maids is charging me out at $30 an hour. They pay me $15 an hour. But all they're doing is sort of routing me to these customers. Like, I can do that myself. And he started his own company. And at this point, last time I talked to him, he had 30-odd sort of cleaning crews working for him. Since he'd built his own Molly Maids to some degree. And he just saw the opportunity for growth. And it was his hustle and his ambition and our customers that made that happen. So I don't think there's sort of one answer to that question, because I think small businesses get started for very different reasons. And so we've got to be able to work for both.
Are we going to get back here? And
Hi, I'm Scott. I work in fintech for a large financial institution, which doesn't really have much to do with my question. But I have spent about half of my life working for myself, and for now I'm with a big company, so I really relate to what both sides. What I'm really interested in, though, is this balance of workers across industries, and how it tends to. We like to hope that it tends to self-balance, but it often doesn't, and particularly as we evolve, right, as everything changes, and we all of a sudden have a lot of workers in one industry and not enough in another. Mm-hmm. And when I look at your list of recommendations, I see kind of a common thread, and you see the first one was the social safety net, and one of the challenge there jumps out at me is healthcare, right? I mean, I look at the second one, regulatory. Well, healthcare, and I look at the third one, it's training. Healthcare. It's there's a lot of it kind of diminishes a little bit, but even the housing crisis. I mean, one of the reasons as we get older of why we want to live in expensive cities is because that's where the good healthcare is, right? We don't want to we can't really afford to live in New Mexico because we're not going to be close to the healthcare needs that we need. So my question is really, what is the role of healthcare that you see going forward as we go in the future of work, and what is there? How are we going to deal with it? Is it going to be is the balance right there?
Yeah. So I tend to respect customers' preferences. So I think the fact that we spend whatever it is now, 17% of GDP on healthcare expenditure is actually not because we have a broken healthcare system, though I'm sure I know that in many ways we do. It's much more because healthcare is one of the most valuable things in your life. And we are rich enough where we can now spend that kind of money on it. I saw this chart recently where instead of plotting healthcare expenditure by GDP, it looked at disposable income. And basically there was a very tight relationship between how much disposable income there was per capita in a given country and how much they spent on healthcare. And when you look at it that way, the United States is not an outlier at all. We're just a lot richer than just about everybody. And so as really rich people, we've decided that our health is the most valuable thing to us. And my reaction to that is, makes sense. Like, staying alive seems awesome, and I would like to stay alive and stay healthy. So I think there's a question of how you administer it, how you sort of pay for it. Like, there are all sorts of questions there. But the fact that we spend a lot on it, it's just a reflection of how rich we are and how much we value our lives. I think the mental exercise that you could say is, if I was offered the spread between what I pay today in healthcare and what a median worker paid in 1970, but could only then access 1970s healthcare, would I take that trade? My guess is none of you would do it. Which tells me you actually are getting what you want. Which doesn't mean it can't be better, but I don't know. I look at customers as being the best people to decide what they want to spend money on. So there's plenty that we can make better there. I'm not trying to sort of make small of that, but being healthy is awesome.
I must say, just the one thing about the healthcare that is a little bit saddening in that, it seemed like we were moving into a 21st century kind of portable benefits thing, and then it's kind of been unwound a little bit recently. So there is a kind of a sense of like, oh my God, do we really have to go back and figure that one out again? But
thankfully, the core of it is still there.
Yeah, no, that's true.
It is still portable. And look, there are things that can and should be made better about the ACA, and hopefully will be. But the portability, thankfully, is not something that we seem like we're going to lose.
Agreed. We got someone way back there. Is that right?
Hi, my name is Kelvin. I just live in San Francisco.
Me too.
Yeah. So my question is also regarding healthcare, right? The reason that we kind of go towards, a wage-based job is because the job provides healthcare and 401k and all these benefits, right? Do you see in the gig economy that, like, in the future there'll be like, people that band together and buy their health benefits at cheaper prices and stuff like that?
Yeah, so first off, the reason we do that today is because the tax law incentivizes that, right? So there is a subsidy, or particularly before the ACA, to getting health care through your employer. So that structurally is the reason why we have health care primarily administered and provided through employers. I think if you got rid of these dynamics, you would see a company like Uber offer healthcare to its drivers as a retention tool. I know they would do it in a heartbeat if it didn't change their worker classification issues and sort of trigger all this legal stuff that would happen. Driver retention is the biggest issue for ride-sharing companies. Everybody cares about healthcare. Instead of just giving the bonus if you hit 50 rides in a month in dollars, What if you gave it in healthcare? I'm sure they would try it if the law was more flexible in that regard. So I think what we have done today is very silly, and I would love to see it sort of move to a market that is more rational, and we sort of risk share with society as a whole rather than our random group of colleagues. I don't know, that seems to make more sense. And I think the ACA was a huge step in that direction. But obviously we have a ways to go still.
Chris in the back here.
Hi, my name is Chris. I run the Center for Unintended Consequences of Tech, so this is relevant. My question, I guess I would love to hear more about the element I touched on earlier of kind of the upskilling or reskilling of individuals as we move forward. Have you seen any good examples that you can share with us, or are you guys thinking of venturing in that space down the road as that becomes more and more of a need?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking about these unintended consequences a little bit. I was talking to a pro here in the audience who's a DJ, and called me and sort of Thumbtack out for the fact that we are enabling many other pros to come in and charge a lower rate. And the reaction to that, on one hand, is like, it's not the platform, it is the technological trends that are happening. So the access to digital photography tools, to digital DJ equipment has exploded the number of people who are interested in providing that service. What has happened? The wage has come way down. And so there's this challenge of like the skills that sort of are in demand today are also a reflection of the tools that are sort of being used by those industries. The flip side is the home trades. If you actually want great employment today, and certainly in California, but really all around the country, like being a welder, an HVAC specialist, a plumber, like those are services that are immensely in demand. And so I think what we can do as a platform is help reveal where there is an imbalance and showcase, hey, you know what? There's a lot of DJs. There are a lot of people who want to be DJs because it's cool and fun. That's going to lower the price. And so if you want to make a career out of this, you're going to have to think real hard about that. On the flip side is, hey, if you want to pick up a new trade, you should know that the world is in need of more HVAC specialists. So we've talked about sort of publishing sort of this economic opportunity map, and that's something that we'd love to use our data to do. But it's tricky. Like the skills is not a static thing. It has to do a lot with the tools and how in demand it is. And I think the one thing we can be sure of is that there's going to be more dynamism. Things are going to spike faster and fall faster, and so we have to build a society that is sort of resilient to that change, because I think that is the only thing we can be sure of.
Don't you think, because we've been doing a lot of work on the future work, again, through Reinvent and other projects. Do you think we have to think about people with higher skills, independent workers, and commodity skills differently? Because it seems to me that anyone with skills under demand, this world actually plays to your favor. And in fact, weirdly, if you're a company that needs those kind of people, you're actually disadvantaged with this increasing atomized economy because you got to keep attracting them. Whereas if you're commodity work, which is really kind of undifferentiated, there's not a lot you got to kind of leverage yourself into a decent wages. I don't know. Do you think of it that way as two different kinds of skill sets?
I think you're right to call that out, but I really believe in the talent of almost everybody. Like everybody has something that they are talented at that the world around them is interested in paying them for. And it's like a utopian dream, and I know it's not true to 100%, but I've met so many of these professionals. I've talked to so many people who've reinvented themselves, who've discovered that passion, that desire, that talent, and what they need is a way to find their counterparty, to find the market for themselves. Because I think if you're offering a commodity service, like that's routine. That's what automation is coming for. It has to be non-routine. It has to be a sort of custom, unique thing.
So we've got someone here who's been spending a lot of his career and thinking about the future. So Lawrence, Do you want to? He wants to ask a question, so this is good since we're talking about the future of work. What is your
you,
question?
and thank you. It's an extraordinarily interesting and encouraging future. Thank you. But I'd like, if I might, just to ask about an alternative future to get your reaction. You noted that new business formations off, and in fact, exits are up. I mean, the economy is consolidating. If that trend continues and the dynamics of capital continue in the way they have, if government isn't responsive against the 4 points you listed, and we get a future in which we're going to be increasingly reliant for jobs that pay on those more consolidated companies, in a way sort of like the ramp out of the Great Depression through World War II into the last lock-in, up until, say, the 70s, when big companies were the source of new jobs. How do the lessons you've learned work if they have to work in a large organizational context?
That's a great question. So there's a factual question that I don't understand how to square. Because on one hand, you're absolutely right, new business formation is down, exits are up, so we're consolidating. So the median size of a company that a worker is working at is going up. However, when you look at people working for themselves or in these alternative arrangements, that's also going up. So there's this weird problem around the definition of a firm and a company, and so I don't know exactly how those trends net out. But I will grant you the hypothetical because it's a very interesting one. That to me is a dystopian outcome. That's what I worry a lot about, where these sort of titans of industries, these natural monopolies, extract the rents and we are sort of beholden to their whims. Now, my guess is that's when people sort of pull up the proverbial pitchforks and come after them. And I think if that's truly what would happen, I think you would see antitrust and sort of these efforts become much more sort of active in sort of pulling that down. But I don't know. I don't know. It's not something I think about. Maybe because I don't want it to be true.
But also, I would say the biggest companies on the planet right now are literally all technology companies.
By market cap, yeah.
By market cap, that weren't there literally 15 years ago, or certainly weren't at the commanding heights of the global economy. And again, these are people that you probably have access to. I kind of have some relationship to. It's like my feeling is that they don't want to have that kind of future. They don't want to be the kind of
They don't run their business as if that were true, though.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know. It's but they're in a system, yeah, that they're actually playing in. But don't you think if it came to that you could imagine the tech industry, let's just put it broadly, as actually going with some shift that would actually get away from that dystopian future? Or maybe not.
I mean, look, the hopeful vision, I think, in that scenario is that these companies have created such insane technological prowess that we actually are rich enough where a lot of people don't have to work and maybe are able to divine their purpose in life from things that are not sort of work. And that's sort of a future that I think it's hard to imagine because we've never had that possibility. But there is a vision for the power of technology, AI and robotics and all this stuff, where it truly is able to replace so much where there's a lot more leisure time. If the trend of, the average work week goes down, keeps going, then it sort of ends at zero.
How many are for that? That'll be good. Let's see. In the back here. Oops. Can we get the mic? Is it on?
John Littman. I write for SmartUp, and people talk about ecosystems. So they talk about the San Francisco ecosystem, London, Paris. But you have this knowledge of all these little ecosystems, of these towns and counties where people are starting to develop this new network. And what do you see happening, and what would you advise to mayors and officials in these small places to create this new atmosphere for these tiny little ecosystems to grow and thrive?
So my answer would depend on whether they had a university in their town or not. I think universities are the anchor tenants of the new geography of jobs. And without that, it's hard to attract the knowledge workers that are the sort of first order enablers of growth and development and wealth that then sort of creates a rich and vibrant sort of economy around it. And without that, I struggle to see real hope. And I think there's going to be this question of like, is every locale worthy of saving? I think we're going to have to wrestle with that. My guess is that will come at huge expense. And so we will have to decide, is that what we want to subsidize? People living in a way that maybe they've lived for a long time, or that they would prefer to live in, but is economically disadvantaged. You know, we had all these railway towns melt away after the railway sort of economy disappeared. Is the same thing going to happen again? I think that is probably more likely than not.
Well, you just because I've seen you in another context talking to a bunch of mayors from all over the country, came here to kind of understand Silicon Valley, and I happened to be in this meeting, and they were from a lot of these smaller cities. Do you actually, but there was a kind of sense of hope that there's some kind of transference that could happen. But so even if you don't have what advice would you give, let's say, even if they don't have a university or something?
Mayors aren't elected to shut down their own city. So like, I
did give your best shot.
I did not offer that. I did not go there with them. Honestly, look, we're not going back to an agrarian economy. We're not going back to an industrial economy. We are fully a service economy, and the commanding heights of that are driven by knowledge workers that are educated at universities, and I don't see that changing. So, like, the sort of layout of the United States looks different than when we were all farmers, and nobody sort of talks about how we should all live like that again. So I think it's this question is much less about sort of left or right or liberal, conservative. It's much more past and future. I think that is much more the orientation that we're going to have to take to these questions and acknowledge that the future is going to be different. And I think the more honest, if harder thing, is to acknowledge the winners and the losers and start talking about how we want to pay those debts and how we want to deal with those outcomes.
Tough love, but I think it's true. Let's we got the last few questions here, but it's.
Oh, you're there. Sorry. Great, thank you. My name's Jeff. You may detect from the accent, I'm not from around here. But I'm certainly in the gig economy. I've lived in San Francisco 7 years, and just to put it to context, I have a Hong Kong residency. I have a British passport. I'm on my way to getting an Ethiopian passport. So I know a thing or two about what goes on outside of this country. I can honestly say, and just to pick up on the earlier point, I would strongly encourage you to have a good, long, hard look at the gig economy in different parts of the world, and certainly in those parts of the world that are not restricted by I think to some degree, a dystopian government. I mean, the Gini coefficient number alone is probably the most dramatic thing that anybody should be looking at here, because I think what that really is determining is that it's super, super difficult for anybody to then get into the gig economy in the United States of America, no matter which state or county you're in. You're done. And so I think it'd be very interesting for you to take a longer look at
which countries would you encourage
I
us
think
to
you
look
should
at?
look at what's going on now in Hong Kong. I think you should look at what's going on even in Thailand, in Jakarta, in Indonesia. I think you take a good, long, hard look at what's going on in Ghana, in Angola, which was a near-failed state 10 years ago, Colombia. There are so many examples where I think there is a much more positive outcome. And one of the reasons there's a much bigger positive outcome is they're not restricted by a healthcare system that is so restrictive. It just beggars belief, frankly.
Yeah.
So I think I would encourage you and your group to go and take a good, long, hard look at what's going on around and then report back in 6 to 9, 12 months and it would be super refreshing, and then it would give you a pretty good indicator in terms of what the government needs to do in order to make it so much easier for people in this country to get by.
Yeah, well, thanks for that feedback. I mean, to your point about healthcare being so important, the year after the ACA came out, we did a survey of the pros who indicated that they had started their business in the last year. And we asked them, why? Well, why did you go into business for yourself? And 1/3 of them cited the ACA, access to healthcare on the individual market, as the primary enabler of them going into business for themselves that year. Makes sense. Like, healthcare for yourself, for your family, like, that's one of the most important and precious things. Like, that giving more of these benefits in a portable way will let more and more people participate in this economy in a more productive way.
Okay, there are some very bona fide experts in the future work here that I was on the verge of outing. But if there's any ones that want to actually raise, in the last couple questions here, anything that's really missing in this discussion from the basic buy, and we gotta answer here, but anyone has a last comment or question about some of the pieces. We've laid out a lot of the pieces in a whole year-long project we worked on. You've touched on so many of these things, but there might be a few last things we should raise up. But let's ask a question here, and any last questions.
There's not a last question, it's just a little small point, but I'm just wondering, my name is Bob and I live here, and I just, do you or any of your associates in this, that aggregates all of these services from people, how do you give them a leg up? Like, if you have all those contractors who are doing HVAC work or doing whatever they're doing, they're in competition with larger companies that have great buying power. They can go and buy air conditioning from manufacturers and wholesalers at much cheaper prices than these individual people. Can you aggregate all the people who are in your group who are providing a certain kind of service and make a deal for them with the manufacturers and the distributors so that they can compete with the bigger operations, so that they're not always at a loss paying much, much more for the materials they need to compete?
So I'd like to believe so. I think if we do our jobs well as a platform, we level the playing field. And actually, I think today we've taken a big step in that direction. So often a sort of big local company will have a front office worker who's in the business of picking up the phone and responding to customers, responding to leads that maybe are coming in over the web. That is something that not every company can afford. In many ways, we've replaced that front office worker with software. We're helping these folks send quotes, respond to customers in a much more automated and efficient way, and that is a step in the direction of leveling the playing field. And I'd like to believe that we can continue to take these steps. Group buying is something that we've talked about and looked at, and there's no question that there's sort of inequities there between sort of a large buyer who can pool their purchases versus a very small one. Access to insurance products is another one, access to capital. So we have a long way to go. I don't want to claim that we have sort of gotten rid of those inequities. But actually, I think the nice thing about like the software platform we're building, and really any software platform, is it's the same for everybody. Like,
you have the data from these companies. You're like the poor man's Dun and Bradstreet.
Yeah.
Way, because now they can say, I belong to this group, and we verifiably order $100,000 or $400,000 worth of HVAC equipment a year. So we belong to this pool that buys
That's right.
$1 million worth, and therefore we want that same discount.
well, it's interesting you bring up Dun and Bradstreet. I think actually one of the biggest things that we've enabled to date is individuals to accrue reputation and build a brand in a way that they can then market. So historically, why did a journeyman plumber join a plumbing company? For the access to customers, for the brand that guaranteed the quality of service, and then the sort of back office stuff. At the end of the day, is the plumber themselves going out and doing the job, and sometimes there were 2 and 3 people, but by and large, it was sort of one man. And we are helping them sort of get the services that the firm used to provide with software. And the firm historically charged 60% of their wage sort of came to the firm, and the worker captured about 40%. We think we can change that calculus. You give some back to the customer, you give some back to the pro, and obviously, we take a fee ourselves. So I truly believe that software is often a very democratizing force because it is universally accessible and sort of typically it's the same for like your version of Google is the same version of Google I use, and Word and OSs and server, all this stuff. Like there's usually just one version we all use, and that's fundamentally democratizing, I think.
All right. One of the bona fide experts took the challenge to kind of do one of the closing comments here or questions. And John Zeisman, do you want to identify yourself here?
Yes, I'm at UC Berkeley most of the time when I'm not doing other things in the kind of world you all live in professionally. I would start by saying that I really share with you the need for a narrative that's positive. The question really becomes, if you don't have that narrative, then in fact the fear of the robots are coming and tomorrow is the end of the universe really takes over. And I would also agree with a lot of the policy directions that you want to go. That is the portability of resources and of benefits, rebuilding a social network and a social safety net along those lines. And I will quickly become a customer of Thumbtack because I need some help. So thank you very much. So
what did we mess up though? What did you think was wrong?
The problem is I have a much more pessimistic view of some of the challenges than you do. I listened to your presentation. I agree with a lot of the facts, and I see the outcome from those facts a lot differently, which means the challenge is deeper, and we share a desire to address that challenge. The first of which is that if you don't really make any, the real productivity is the basis of solving the inequality problems, of solving growth and the like. And the difficulty is the real productivity is taking place in the tradable goods sector. And if you don't see a real increase in the tradable goods sector, we have a broader problem. In other words, we then end up sharing on whatever terms a smaller and smaller set of outcomes. I should also say to the gentleman who wants us to take Ghana as an example, I'm not aiming at a Ghanaian standard of living, so let's think about this as an advanced country problem. Similarly, in the healthcare side of this, the difficulty is that the health outcomes in the United States are much worse than they are in any of the other advanced countries. So we're spending much more money in a desperate effort to get to the outcomes that other people get for less. So the question becomes, how do we, and maybe we can do this together, how do we in fact start to apply these kinds of tools to increase the productivity in the tradable goods sector? The health issues don't necessarily have to end up with clustering because in fact AI tools and communication tools means a lot of that kind of healthcare can be delivered in smaller communities in new and innovative kinds of ways. So maybe together we can sort of take our shared goal, which is to create a narrative that allows us to build a productive society, to augment the capacities of workers, and try and address the hard parts, what I think are the really hard parts of this, which are how to create tradable goods and increase productivity and address the inequality problem, which you clearly share as a goal.
I welcome that.
Any thought on that last?
Well, the productivity thing is a great point. It's interesting that we, on one hand, are freaking out about AI and robots, and at the same time are freaking out about low productivity growth. In many ways, like, one of those two has to be wrong. My hope is that automation and AI and these technologies are as impactful as people hope them to be, because that's our only hope in increasing the labor productivity in this country, which is at lows. We are not in a good place, and that's how we create a fundamentally more prosperous society that has the resources to undertake these sort of programs. So I think productivity is absolutely at the center of it, particularly as you call out in these service sectors, right? Healthcare and education. You look at these graphs of the inflation of various things. Like TVs is rock bottom, right? You can buy an insanely big TV for like no money now that 5-10 years ago cost a lot more. Healthcare, education, college is all going the opposite direction. It's getting more and more expensive over time for the same unit of service being delivered, and that's a big problem.
So we're going to end the conversation on the positive future of work with a little bit of a sobering kind of comment, but Let's give a big hand to Marco for a fantastic conversation.
Thanks very much.
And folks, it's not over yet. There's drinks, more food, and all of you to chat, and let's have a good conversation. Continue.